This is another installment of a video series on essentially everything that is really falls under the law. Okay, so let me do a quick introduction. My name is Attorney Genghis Shakhan. I'm the managing attorney at Shakhan and Wilkerson Law Firm. We are a boutique law firm of just two, myself and it's a tandem, myself and attorney Chelsea Wilkerson. We are small on purpose. It gives us an opportunity to get to really know our clients' cases, get to really know our clients, who oftentimes we speak with every week or every other week. That being said, if you need a legal consultation, you're looking to possibly retain an attorney in the area of divorce, family law, personal injury, or criminal defense, feel free to either tap the link in our bio and talk to one of our legal experts, or you can give us a call at 478-845-1213 or 404-999-9529, and we'd be more than happy to assist you and help you out, okay? All right, guys. So today's topic is what you should wear to court, okay? So that's a really important topic, especially for those of you that have hearings coming up. If you have hearings around the corner, you do want to pay attention to this video, or you can share it with a friend or family member that does have a court hearing that is on the horizon, okay? Before we get into that, quick disclaimer, this video is for educational purposes only. This is not intended to be a legal consultation. Of course, by watching this video, this does not establish an attorney-client relationship between you and the law firm of Shakhan and Wilkerson, or between you and myself, okay? All right, so now we have the legal stuff out the way. Why don't we go ahead and do a deep dive? We're gonna talk a little bit about what you should wear to court and how your appearance can actually impact your criminal or your family law case. So we're going to talk about really just those two in context, okay? All right, so one of the easiest things you could do when it comes to making an impression, a positive first impression, is you can dress well. And what I mean by dressing well is I don't mean spend a lot of money, because I don't believe in that. I don't think that you need to spend a lot of money to essentially look good, okay? And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about that. And so let's just talk about your attorney, all right? So maybe some people feel like, hey, that's not important. Would you like your attorney to come to court in a wife beater and some distressed jeans and some Air Force Ones? You probably would not, for a myriad of reasons. One is, whether they're standing before a judge or whether they're standing before a jury, they are not going to be taken seriously, okay? One, you probably wouldn't, the judge probably wouldn't allow you to get past the bar to even get up in advance and make any arguments if you, of course, don't essentially look the part, okay? There is something called a courtroom decorum, all right? And so, but that is, the same for really any professional, right? If you think about a surgeon or a doctor, you walk into a doctor's office, he's wearing a hoodie, and he or she is wearing a hoodie, and they have on some cargo shorts and flip-flops, right? And they're scheduled to operate on your heart or give you a vasectomy, okay? Or do some kind of plastic surgery, okay? Are you fine with it? I don't care how reputable the doctor is. There is something that is to be said about looking the part, okay? And so that is the importance of looking a certain way, giving a first impression, if you will, when you arrive in the court, all right? So it's not about your lawyer, it's not about evidence, but more right now, it's about how you present yourself. Because at the end of the day, if it's a criminal case, the jury is looking at you, the judge is looking at you, and of course, they're considering all those other factors as well. But you want to control what you can control, and what you can control is your appearance and how, other people perceive you. Okay, and so that's what we want to talk about today. All right. So today's topic will be about what you should and what you should not be wearing in court. And if you're in court and involved in a criminal case or domestic relations case around Georgia, you want to be mindful of this stuff, okay? So why appearance matters, it matters for all the reasons I've already stated. Judges, of course, are trained to decide cases based on the law and the evidence and not appearance. But there is the reality that we judge books by their cover. We say not to do it, right? There is these old adages about you should never judge a book by its cover. But let me ask you a question, and it's a rhetorical question. You can think about it. You're walking down the street and you walk past someone, and they appear to be disheveled. They appear to there's an odor wafting from them, like they've been outside working or running or working out all day long. You're going to make assumptions about that person. Okay, you're going to make assumptions. It's not fair, but you're going to make those assumptions about that person, right? And it's the same, with society. A society makes assumptions about people based upon their appearance. And oftentimes that impression is a lasting impression, right? So if you have, a trial that's going to basically be heard over a few days, and the jury is coming back, their first impression of you is probably going to be a lasting impression. And you've heard that adage as well. That first impression is a lasting impression. How the first time someone sees you or meets you is really how they will always receive you. And that's one of the reasons why, at least back in the day, your mother told you. I can remember my mother telling us to, always leave the house wearing clean underwear and, a clean shirt, because, you don't know what's going to happen. You might end up in the emergency room, and you are a representation of your mother and your family. All right. And so, you don't want to come across as a ragamuffin. And so you want to essentially make sure that you look good, and that you are giving a great first impression. So that wisdom applies to the court as well. You want to dress respectfully. You want to demonstrate to the court, whether it's a jury or a judge, that you're taking the proceedings very seriously, and that you have dressed accordingly. Okay, and so without opening your mouth, there is really no other way to demonstrate that except for how you dress and your conduct inside that courtroom. Okay, so the goal is to look respectful, not expensive. Okay, that is, you don't want to look like you're dripping in jewelry. It's not your time to floss, if you will. It is your time to look good, but good in a professional sense. Okay, so your goal is not to impress the judge. So you don't want to wear your Beyonce Freakum dress, or wear your prom suit, or Easter suit to church. I mean, suit to the court. However, you do want to come across as clean, neat, professional, respectful, and well groomed. Very important. All right. So you don't need an expensive wardrobe. You can keep it simple and conservative. That's usually going to be your best choice. You'll see that a lot of times your attorney will do the same. All right. You just really have to follow suit. They're not going to be wearing a lot of gaudy jewelry. They may not be wearing $2,000, $3,000 suits, unless you're watching the show Suits. Those guys wore some expensive suits. And I imagine maybe if you're a Wall Street lawyer, or you're working in big law, maybe that's important. I don't know. I don't work in big law. So, but of course, in a criminal case, you don't want to come across as really anything that is less than really a conservative professional look. All right. And so I recommend, this is attire for men wearing dress pants or khakis, a button-down shirt, or maybe a polo, a belt, dress shoes, or at least clean closed-toed shoes. You shouldn't be wearing sandals in the courtroom. A blazer or a suit, to me, is always, if you have it, you should get your hands on it, and a tie if appropriate. And I'm going to say this to you guys. All right. To me, there are no excuses. You can get a shirt and tie. Even if you go to, a secondhand store, and there are a lot of them all over the state of Georgia, you can walk in the secondhand store and grab a tie for 50 cents, 25 cents. You can go get a button-down shirt that fits you, for $1. Okay. And so, I don't. We have to get beyond the excuses. You could come to court in a shirt and a tie. And if again, if you don't have the money, you can stay in that secondhand store and you can buy a blazer. Now, folks will say, "Hey, Attorney Shakhan, is that something you would do?" I wore secondhand clothes as a young person. All right, we shopped. There used to be a place in Ohio. It was called Charity Newsies. I don't know if it's still around. I don't know if it exists, but we would go. My mother would take us to a secondhand store, and we would buy clothes. Okay, nice clothes. All right, and I wore those clothes. Those were my school clothes. Okay, and I was, in many instances, I was proud of them, and unless they had some bell bottoms, I didn't care for the bell bottoms. However, I'm saying all of that to say, and I still go into secondhand stores, because again, I'm not an antique guy, but sometimes I will find things that I absolutely would love to purchase, right? And so if I have a criminal case, and I'm only bringing that up because if you have a criminal case, for example, it's imperative, especially if you're looking at you're facing a lot of time. Okay, it's imperative that you look your best. And so a shirt and tie, and again, it can be, maybe I'll do another video about what type of shirt and tie that you might want to think about wearing in the courthouse. But it can be solid colors. I mean, this one, as you can see, it is multicolored, but it can be just solid, and it can be just a basic button down shirt with the collar. Okay. And if you have the resources, go ahead and grab yourself a jacket. And again, you can grab a jacket that fits, relatively cheap in a secondhand store. Now, if you have the resources, then yeah, one of the things we were told, as a young person, whether I was in the Marine Corps or even when I was in high school, is every man should have a suit, right? You should have one suit at least, okay? And so whether it's to go to church in, or whether it's to go to an interview in, or whether it's to appear in court in, right? And so I don't mean to go off on a tangent there, but it's important that you come to court well dressed, especially if you have a serious criminal case, right? Something to think about. So things to avoid: don't come to court with a tank top on. Okay, you look ridiculous. All right. If you're standing in front of a jury, these guys are looking at you. The judge is looking at you. It comes across as you're not taking the proceedings seriously. You didn't, you're very casual, nonchalant, kind of attitude about your appearance. It leaves a bad impression, I imagine, on a jury. Okay, so don't come wearing sleeveless shirts or sagging your pants or athletic shorts, pajamas. Lord have mercy. A lot of times they will stop you at the at the courthouse door if you're there in pajamas. If you have on some type of something covering your hair. Gentlemen can't wear hats a lot of times in the courts, and they'll let you know right there at the door. Okay. Obviously, clearly, please, Lord, no bonnets in the courtroom, flip flops, clothing with offensive language on it. They're going to usually stop you right there before you even go through security, right? Because you'll probably get embarrassed up in the courtroom if the judge calls you out. Okay. And so they'll usually stop you at security, but those are things you don't want to wear. And so let's talk about for our ladies, and I won't do a deep dive. I'm not a lady, so I could only speak very generally to what we hope our ladies would wear. You can wear dress pants, you can wear a blouse, a conservative dress, you can a skirt, the appropriate length, right? So like kind of like in church, if you got to, put a napkin over your waist to sit down, and on the benches, then it's probably not going to be appropriate for court. Though I will say it's always interesting in these divorce cases, or even sometimes the custody cases where folks haven't been, separated for too long. They want to look good, step out looking good for their, their ex-partner. So always fun to see what, people are wearing in those situations in the civil cases, domestic relations cases. But again, dress is appropriate length, closed toes, flats or low heels, the stilettos, 6-inch heels. Uh, I would highly advise against wearing them in court. A blazer, a cardigan, if desired, that's going to be what you want to wear. You want to avoid things that are overly revealing, short skirts or shorts, clothing with offensive slogans, graphic tees, flip flops, just again casual attire. Bonnet's absolutely a no go. Okay, and then of course, ladies, if you're and gentlemen, your hair. These are things that we used to. If you know anything, I used to be a school administrator and work in middle schools and high schools. These were things that we used to tell the middle school kids. We used to talk about hygiene. We used to talk to the kids about dressing appropriately, how to wash behind their ears and clean themselves, and certain hot spots they want to pay attention to, so they don't come across as offensive. I don't. I guess maybe that was discussed in finishing schools, and I know that as a Gen Xer, some of that stuff is probably not covered in the schools anymore. And so I guess we have a generation of adults who didn't profit and benefit from that training. So hopefully this video is helpful, but taking, when your hair, doing something with your hair, if you have long hair, brushing it, combing it, styling it, etc. Right. Same with gentlemen. You don't have to be, clean shaven like myself, but doing something with your facial hair, brushing your teeth. I had to say it. Brushing your teeth. All of that is, deodorant. Those type of things are things you want to really give some serious thought to and think about. And I promise you, I'm not saying any of this in jest. And though it might come across as humorous, I think I'm just a funny person. But if you're coming into a closed space, and of course, as I mentioned, the judge as well as the jury, they're looking at you, okay? And so you want to just be mindful of what you look like, and again, the impression that you are presenting when it comes to appearing in the courtroom, okay? So, and that kind of gets into the area I was just mentioning is grooming, all right? And so I talked to Leah briefly about grooming, and you can really sense the discomfort, that I have in really addressing this, is because it just feels like it's it's not as disingenuous, but that it's a conversation that I wouldn't have with adults. These were conversations that I used to have with children. And so, but I am seeing more and more that it is a conversation that adults are profiting from. So, I'm sharing it, with in the hopes of it being helpful. Okay. So clean hair, good hygiene, trim facial hairs if applicable, minimal fragrances, so you don't, want to bathe yourself. I know right now there's a viral TikTok where the gentleman sprays the cologne, and he captures it in his hand and wipes it in his beard. Awesome TikTok, by the way. But keep the fragrances to a minimum. You're in a packed courtroom with a few hundred people. If everyone is kind of bathed in cologne, you're going to be miserable when it comes to really your allergies. And so, but keep it to a minimum. But appearance, just make sure that you're neat, you're clean, and that you are, again, I'm going to continue. It's going to be really a recurring theme. Your first impression. Okay, super important. All right. So tattoos and piercings, if they're visible, yeah, you want to cover them, right? Minimize, anything that is distracting, okay? Anything that a juror will really focus or hone in on. And that's going to be the same for a judge. Anything that is going to draw them in. If you have facial piercings, I can't tell you what to do with them, but again, you might want to think about removing, those things or covering certain things, that might be perceived as offensive or just a distraction when it comes to court. So the goal is to reduce distractions. You don't want folks to be distracted when it comes to really adjudicating, and deciding your fate. Okay, some because a lot of times these juries are they're full of conservative people. Okay, so you got to kind of keep that in mind as well. All right, and you want them to focus on the facts of your case, not what you are wearing or lack thereof. Okay. And so why is any of this stuff important? Let's just talk about family law. In a family law case, in divorce child custody cases, the court's evaluating many factors. So clothing won't determine an outcome, but presenting yourself as organized and responsible and respectful can reinforce that image that you do want to convey. So if the argument is that you are an unfit parent, right? If somebody's arguing that you are an unfit parent, the opposing side, and you come to court and your hair is not, is disheveled, your clothes are, it looks like you don't pay a lot of attention to your appearance. You are helping the opposing side make their case. You understand that, right? And so and I'm not going to even talk about your conduct, on direct or cross examination, which will also add to that impression that the judge might have of your personage, right? And so we want to make sure that we look a certain way, so that we don't, essentially put ourselves in position where, the court might say, oh, okay, well, that looks right. Maybe they are unfit, given that, they don't really take care of themselves. Maybe that narrative that they don't take care of their children is appropriate because they don't appear to take care of themselves, right? And so that's something that you do want to think about. Remember, minimizing distractions is what we want to do. In a criminal case, obviously, arriving like someone who is, respects the court, someone that follows their attorney's advice. You want the evidence to speak for itself, not your appearance. Okay. And so dressing conservatively, dressing like you're taking those proceedings seriously, will go a long way with you, as well as in terms of the perception of the jury, right? All right, so you want to come across as respectful. You want to compliment your with your overall courtroom demeanor. All right. So courtroom behavior is also important. I talked about that briefly. I talked, a little bit about the appearance, but behavior. Couple that with your behavior. You want to arrive early. You want to silence your phone. You want to make sure you're standing when the jury enters, standing when the judge enters, addressing the judge respectfully. If the judge has questions for you, avoid interrupting, remaining calm. If you disagree with what's being said, maybe you can write it down, pass notes over to your attorney, as opposed to trying to talk during the proceedings. Not arguing with the judge or the opposing side if you are being cross-examined. That kind of professional behavior often speaks even louder than your wardrobe. But if you couple them together, you are putting yourself. Those are the two things that you can control in that courtroom, guys. You can control your conduct and you can control your appearance. You need to be in control of them. Okay? You need to be in control of those two things. Everything else is beyond your control. And so, that's the reason why I'm focusing on those things. Come to court controlling the things that you can control. Those two things are those things, right? Super important to really think about. So here's some things you want to avoid. All right. You want to avoid wearing clothing, I told you, with profanity or controversial messages, wearing sunglasses unless you medically need them in the courtroom, chewing gum. I have to tell clients to spit the gum out. You're talking to a judge, you're chewing gum, or you're sitting at, the table, and the jury is looking over at you. You look very casual. You look very comfortable. You're chewing your gum, smacking. It gives off a certain energy. And again, it's a distraction. Wearing wrinkled or dirty clothes, again, it just comes across, if you're disheveled, it comes across a certain type of a way, right? And it really just depends on what you're in court for. That whatever, that perception that you are giving the jury or the judge of yourself, it can ultimately, be a deciding factor, okay? And so you can't assume that a jury or a judge won't care or that they will not judge a book by its cover. You judge books by their cover. I judge books by their cover. It is a great adage that you should not do it, but the reality is people do it every day, okay? So come to court controlling the two things you can control, your conduct and your appearance, all right? All right, guys, hopefully this has been educational. If it has, feel free to give us a like. If you know someone that is going to court, they have a case, they have a hearing that's coming up, you might want to forward this along to them, and let them know that, something, say to them, control the things that you can control. And you essentially let them know what those things are. So think about wearing what you would wear professionally for a job, okay? And if you're doing that, then you're probably on the right track. Thank you for joining us again, guys. If we can help you out, if you need an attorney, you can give us a call, 478-845-1213 or 404-999-9529, or you can tap the link in our bio, talk with one of our legal experts. They'll basically talk with the chat with you, get on the horn with you, and we'll figure out a time to do a consultation with you. We'll also follow up with a email, okay? As always, it's been a pleasure, guys. Make sure that you follow us if you have not followed us already, and hit that notification bell so that you know exactly when we are live, okay? All right, guys, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next video.